Okay, folks, good morning. I'm going to try this, see if we can upload this to YouTube and whether or not you get a chance to see it today or tomorrow. We're looking at module 39, which is on motivation at work. We've already talked a little bit about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Talked about it in class. The idea that you can be externally motivated by a reward such as money or some favor that will be returned to you in order for doing something, as well as an intrinsic motivation where you simply do it for the achievement of doing it. We're going to look at motivation at work. I mean, obviously, you would want your employees intrinsically motivated. You would expect that they'd be work harder and be more on task and so on and so forth. Clearly, there's also extrinsic motivation. I mean, particularly in our day and age with requirement for money and so on and so forth. We're going to look at how do we motivate people at work to the highest potential as much as we possibly can, and what drives some people, and kind of the connections between motivation and work in general. So just talking about what is achievement motivation, it's very simply defined as a desire for significant accomplishment. And so, if you are a doctor and you're looking for some great award, or if you are an employee at a fast food service and you're interested in getting the Employee of the Month, that's an achievement motivation. Skinner himself was, being a behaviorist, had a very, very predefined and set way that he worked. And because of the disciplined way in which he worked, he became one of the 20th century's most influential psychologists. In fact, he was voted as the most influential psychologist above Freud. And did it because he was motivated intrinsically to discover as much as he could about humans and animals and the way that we behave, the way that we work. If we look at the people who have a great need to achieve, what are we looking at? We're typically looking at people who choose tasks that allow for success. So we're typically not looking at people who choose tasks that are virtually impossible. However, that being said, I don't want you to believe that someone who's has a high need to achieve is picking easy things. Those things still have to require skill and effort. So you're looking at people who have that high need to achieve. They're looking at stuff that is possible but requires input, requires work, requires time. And then the other thing that people who have high needs to achieve is that they continue to persist until success is achieved. They're not someone who so often takes the first no or the first mess up as a way to just pull out of the project. These are people that often continue and continue and continue despite adversity. Where does motivation achievement come from? And why does one person become highly motivated and another person less so motivated? Well, we know that there's two basal roots to it. There's an emotional root, and that is people who who associate achievement with positive emotions. We're talking operant conditioning here, really. Again, why B.F. Skinner's involved. If someone sees finally reaching a goal as, oh, thank you, this is great, I feel wonderful, what a feeling of accomplishment, you dot that I and cross that T on that last big project, and you throw it in the bag and it's done. There's an emotional association there. The other thing is a cognitive root. If you you mark your achievements with the fact that you are now more competent. So if you say, if I achieve Employee of the Month, if I achieve this award that I respect, then now I have risen myself to that. I believe that I am as good as that, and I'm going to now up the expectations I have of myself. I need now not only to perform at this level, but at higher levels. And so those are typically the two sources that we see: an emotional affiliation with being done and feeling good about it, as well as the fact that you yourself want to view yourself as more competent. Sigmund Freud. Freud said on work was that he said there were two things that led to a healthy life, and that was a life that was filled with love and filled with work. Now, when he said work, he was not implying getting up and going to do a 9-to-5 job. What he was referring to was whatever it is you see as your life's work. It may be raising children. It may be helping the poor, it may be volunteering, it may be whatever it may be. It wasn't necessarily employment from an extrinsic reward, monetary. It was what you viewed as your life's work. I guess it was last week I asked, how many people view their current job as what they want to be doing for the rest of their lives, and I heard this huge thump of human flesh as everyone's hand hit the desk. If we look at people's attitudes towards work, we typically see it in one of three categories. The first is the job. Most of you, when we went around the room, we talked about the kind of work that you do now. Most of you saw it as a job. The second way that we look upon it is a career. And career is an opportunity to sort of get in, usually at a lower level or a ground level, and then advance from one position to the other. Large organizations often have this ability to climb upwards on some sort of a ladder as you work your ways towards whatever it is that you want to accomplish. And the third way that people often look at work is what we refer to as calling. And that is they do it because it fills an opening that is not being filled by others, and they feel that it is their calling to do that. So if you look at, let's say, someone who decides to become a nurse, or someone decides to go overseas and volunteer in a shelter of some kind, or help the poor, they might not view that as a career or a job. They just may view that as a calling, if in fact that's what it is that they want to do. Flow. Flow is kind of a neat thing. I suspect you've all experienced flow. Flow is that time when your shift is up, or it's time for you to go home to make some appointment. You look at the clock and you go, my God, have I really been here this long? Flow typically occurs in a balance between whether we have no work and we're very apathetic and underwhelmed. So if you've ever been, let's say, employed in some kind of retail and there's a storm out as there is today and no one shows up, there may not be a lot of flow that day. Things may go very slow. On the other end, if you have an incredibly stressful day and you're worked off your feet, and it's maybe the Christmas rush, and no one has been come in to relieve you, and you're short-staffed, at that point in time you're probably anxious and overwhelmed. Flow refers to that period of time sort of in between, and we typically are immersed in our work, and by the time the whistle bell goes and it's time to go home, we don't realize that we've actually been there. These people are typically those people that are driven less by the extrinsic rewards and more by the intrinsic. It's not really about, well, at 5 o'clock I have to leave. It's more about, well, when I'm done for the day, that's when I'm going to leave. We talk a lot in our culture about being satisfied with our work. In industrialized countries, we often suggest that work and satisfaction goes hand in hand. This graph here shows a percentage of people that say that they are satisfied or very satisfied with life. If we look at the difference between white-collar workers, which is somewhere around 82 or 83%, and manual workers about 81%, there really isn't a significant difference. But those who are pursuing work, unemployed or underemployed, around 60. So we often associate that degree of satisfaction with some form of employment. If you think about it, if you meet someone for the first time, you may very well first be asked, okay, what's your name, or where are you guys from, that sort of thing. And the second question, almost inevitably following, is what do you do? We tend to associate in westernized cultures a lot with our satisfaction and who we are by, quote, what our work is, whether in fact it does reflect who we are or not. This idea of improving workmanship and workers' abilities to perform well is what we call IO psychology, or industrial organizational psychology. I'm going to put a link up on the Edmodo page, just a real brief description of what IO is, IO psychology. And here what we're looking at is sort of being divided into three basic areas. The first is personnel psychology. You and I would probably hear a lot of it in the terms of human resource, or HR. Human resources or personnel psychology studies the principle of selecting and evaluating workers. If you have someone that's extremely extroverted, chances are you don't want that person hidden away in the basement doing a job where they're not going to see anyone all through the day. Similarly, you might not want to have an extreme introvert as your education officer. You want to have a balance, and we're looking at evaluating people and trying to fit where is it would they fit within our organization. That's personnel psychology. Organizational psychology actually speaks about the work environment and the management style and how that affects motivation, satisfaction, and productivity. Do some style of jobs perform better when there is a supervisor standing over them all of the time? Or do they perform more poorly? Do they perform better if in fact the common break room is where everybody, even the boss, meets? Does that foster something different than if the boss and the higher ups have a separate break room? Those kinds of things, how we divide up our workplaces, how we work within them, what management style we give different organizations. For example, do we allow people to make their own decisions in certain areas, and does that affect the productivity of the company? And then there's human factor psychology. If you hand a child an iPod or a smartphone, most people comment on how quickly they can function with it. One of the reasons is because those things have been well designed by a psychologist to fit what we do. So some would say that the best gadget is the one that has absolutely no direction, no manual, no instruction manual, because it's intuitive how it works. Believe it or not, that's part of industrial organizational psychology. If you have tools that have to be manipulated at work and used a great deal, you will increase productivity by making sure that those tools are intuitive, and that's what we call human factor psychology. Personnel psychologists assist organizations at various steps in selecting and assessing employees. One of the big thing, of course, is to harness someone's strength. We may have to have them ask them to take a variety of tests to see, are they analytical, are they disciplined, are they eager to learn? If so, this particular part of our company might be the best, and you may perform more effectively within it. Of course, the interview is often what we think of when we look at first realizing whether or not we think someone will fit into our company or not fit into our company. Typically what we see is people who interview for jobs are very confident in their ability to predict how well people will perform. However, what we also discover is that if we actually administer a standardized test, we actually learn more about the person, about how they're likely to perform within our company than the actual interview. Interviewers often overrate their intuition. One of the things that we have to concern ourselves if we are in fact interviewing someone is the difference between intention and habits. Intentions matter, but long-lasting habits matter even more. So if we ask someone, what do you think the importance is of finishing something, a job on budget, and they tell you that, I believe it's very important that all jobs should be finished on budget, but yet if we look and realize that this person's having tremendous financial difficulties in their own life and has had it several times, well, the intention might be that yes, I want to finish all the projects I'm assigned on budget, but the habit is I really give it very little weight. And we have to be careful when we're interviewing and actually look at the person's capabilities as opposed to their intentions. When we look at interviews, they often are the people who, they're often the people who talk about how successful certain picks were, as opposed to the employees that were non-successful. Inevitably, you're going to get people that are going to be successful within your company, or at least we would hope. And we often tend to, as interviewers and HR people, view those great happenstance placements in our companies as opposed to the ones that kind of came in and very quickly left. We often do make presumptions, and this is not just at interviews, we do this all the time. We often look at people to try and get out of them what we want to get out of them as opposed to what's really there. And so we often assume that if someone's walking in for an interview, we have a presumption that in fact they might actually be good at this because they've shown up for the interview or because that's what we want. And often we find that's wrong. The other thing is preconceptions. Interviewers' prior knowledge about the candidate may very well affect the judgment. This is a big deal today, particularly when we're looking at social media. A lot of people today are putting things out on social media that might not reflect on them very well in the job market. A very quick search can turn up on all kinds of stuff that perhaps someone applying for a job doesn't want their employer to know. And if you walk into an interviewer and that HR person has a preconception as to who you are and what it is you do in your spare time, that can affect your ability to get hired, whether or not you would in fact be talented at the job or not. A structured interview is a formal and disciplined way to gather information about an interviewee. Typically what we're looking at is we're trying to pinpoint strengths, attitudes, behaviors, knowledge, skills. A personnel psychologist will probably do the following. They're going to look at the job and say, who do we want? Do we want a details-oriented person for this job? Do we want someone who's got a grasp of the bigger picture? And from that, design the questions to ask the person, do you fit this job, as opposed to do you want this job? And then that interviewer has to be trained to look for the things that we were talking about earlier, looking at intentions versus habits, looking at, do we have any presumptions, do we have any preconceptions, and making sure that they're not affecting or clouding our judgment. How do we appraise performance? Typically, when we appraise performance, what we typically see is that increases employee retention. It typically will determine, in some companies, will determine the rate of pay or the rewards that they're going to get, and it also is an encouragement of better performance. Regardless of how well someone is evaluated by the company, what really determines what they think about their job is their self-rating. Now, the self-rating, how good I see myself at my job, comes from a variety of different aspects. And this little graphic here shows a variety. The supervisor rating certainly has an effect. If your supervisor is telling you that you're doing a good job or you're not doing a good job, that's going to alter your self-rating. The people, the public that you're serving, how well they respond to you, that's going to affect how you see yourself self-rated. Those that you work with, those that are underneath you in your job, all of those things will go together to hopefully improve your self-rating. As we see that rise, we often see employees staying longer in the job, often getting better rewards and pay, greater incentives, very operant conditioning, and then typically an increase of their performance, adopting new policies, moving on with the job at hand. This looks really complicated. It's actually not. When we look at a personnel psychologist's tasks, their job is pretty much to analyze the job, recruit people from a sector of society that we think would be good at that job, and then the selection process. Now, the selection process comes from biographical data, could be just as simply as a resume, references, assessment centers. Maybe there's some tests that the person has to perform. An interview with the person, aptitude tests. Can you in fact perform the skills that we need you to perform as part of this job? Once that occurs, a placement of the person, make sure that in fact it is a good match, and later on down the road an appraisal of how well they've done. Organizational psychologists look at ways to engage and motivate workers. Recent study, 2002, talks about employee engagement. These 6 things tell us, or was a fairly good predictor, of how well or how satisfied an employee is and how well they are engaged with their job. If they know what's expected of them, if in fact their performance is a moving target, and what I mean by that is they never know from day to day exactly what it is they have to accomplish, that will lower their engagement. If in fact they have what's needed to do the work, if you're hiring someone that doesn't have the skills or the aptitude to do that particular job, chances are employee engagement is going to drop. They're going to feel helpless. If they feel fulfilled at that work, is this job the type of thing that when it's completed, not necessarily when they get their paycheck, but when it's completed, do they feel good about the job that they've done? Do they have an opportunity to do their best, or are they shot in the foot? Is there someone that steps in from time to time and sabotages the work? Or is there such a volatility within the company that regardless of how hard someone works, that feeling of reward never gets there? Um, do they view themselves as being part of something significant, or is this just the same old, same old? A lot of times this is what kills employees' engagement. If in fact they say, well, it's another day, it's another dollar, and there really isn't any incentive to change or to do something new, then that's often what we see. Um, and do they have the opportunity to learn and develop? Do they have the opportunity to learn and get better at their job? Even if it appears at first to be somewhat meaningless, if in fact they've got the opportunity to improve, what we see is in fact their engagement, their likelihood of staying increases. What's a good manager, a good coach? Every leader dreams of managing in ways that enhance people's satisfaction. If you look at Larry Brown, famous coach, he offers 4 to 5 very positive comments for one negative. There's no question that people have to hear where they need to improve, but they also have to know what it is that they're doing well. When you're managing well, employees know they're doing well and they know the area that they've got to improve. How do we harness those job relevant strengths? Well, people who are leading well in a team, it is their job to determine the employee's talents and change that work role to that talent. And then once that's there, develop it. If they're a little lax in some area, a little needing in some area, find a way to improve that person's talents and strengths in that area. So, to identify the strengths, match that to the work that they're going to do, manage that in that positive way, that 4 or 5 positive comments to the one critical one, engage those employees in those 6 ideas that we talked about earlier, and from there you're going to have loyal customer growth and profits. I apologize if this came off really fast. I just wanted to make sure I could get it all in one take and get it up on YouTube so you get a look at it. I'm going to post a couple of clips above or below this that are associated with today's module, and we will hopefully get a chance to discuss it tomorrow. All right, talk to you later. Bye-bye.